Hard AF Seltzer is now live in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Ohio, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Illinois. Go to hardafseltzer.com today, click on the store locator, and enter your city or zip to find the closest location nearest you.
We are gold for energy. Send it. Incoming. Put the money in the bag, man.
As I said, your paycheck is your thank you.
What's going on back there? This is awesome! Welcome to Earth! No. Who's flying the plane? Get cockpit. Go. God.
Black Rifle Energy, dropping near you.
Welcome to Drinkin Bros, presented by OmahaSteaks.com. Yeah, welcome to Drinkin Bros, kids, live on YouTube for this Wednesday edition of the show. Man, some days you just get lucky, D'Anthony. Some days there's a couple huge court announcements that happen to drop, and we've got one of the most prominent AGs in America to answer some of our questions here. The Attorney General of Missouri, Andrew Bailey, is back. How are you, sir?
Hey, guys. Really excited to be back on. Thanks for having me.
Are we saying Missouri or Missouri?
Missouri? Yeah, how do we throw an A on that? How are we doing it for you?
You know, I-44 basically is like a run diagonally from St. Louis down to Joplin, Missouri, and anyone south of that generally says Missouri. Anyone north of that generally says Missouri. And since I've always lived north of that, I say Missouri. But, you know, no judgment. It can go either way.
Well, then I'll change mine because we live south of that, and I'll say Missouri. The great state of Missouri, Attorney General Andrew Bailey is here. There, I corrected myself. All right, so breaking news at the top of the show here that we got to get into because I just want your reactions and thoughts on what's going to happen here. First of all, the Diddy trial in New York. Unavoidable. I know you're a busy man, and you do wonderful things, not only for your state, but the rest of the country, but I'm sure you kept an eye on this. He was only found guilty of 2 charges today, which seemed to be just prostitution and not the biggest one, which is the RICO charges and the racketeering there. The judge is scheduled to go live at 5 p.m. Eastern to announce whether or not he's going to get out on bail potentially and go home today. How does that usually work, and what are your thoughts on this case?
Well, I think it's an interesting split verdict where the defendant was acquitted on certain counts, convicted on other counts. It did seem like some of the evidence was a little bit questionable. You know, when you've got people testifying that they felt like they were coerced, but then were struggling to articulate, you know, where the coercion was coming from, and if somebody had explicitly told them that they were being forced, compelled to do something. And it seems like the jury questioned some of that. You know, at the end of the day, he's guilty of criminal offenses, though. And I'm sure that the prosecutors will ask for pretty significant sentences on those guilty verdicts. And it'll be interesting to see what the court does on that.
Yeah, because he's never been convicted of anything.
Yeah.
The first time, offense here, and you're looking at 2 prostitution, essentially, charges. Each of them carries a max penalty of 10 years apiece. But usually, don't they do time served or some form of probation for something like that? Because those are the 2 low-hanging fruit charges.
Yeah, they are. And again, I think there's some aggravating circumstances, though, because it's not just like a John and a prostitute and some kind of consensual relationship. There was more going on here. There were more facts, and so those aggravating circumstances, I think, would persuade or could persuade the judge to impose a more significant sentence. And I think the bond question is going to be interesting at the state level, at least in the state of Missouri. Defendant is entitled to an appeal bond unless they've committed some really specific enumerated offenses that are deemed dangerous. And that's all guided by statute. So I'm not certain at the federal level or how that's going to work in this instance, but I think that the default setting is usually to grant an appeal bond and let the defendant be out while they're appealing the case, and that appeal can take 18-24 months.
Okay, so I'm looking at this right now because they just sent this letter into the judge here. So they're saying $1 million bond, forfeited passports, restricted travel to Miami, New York, and Los Angeles only.
I assume that's where he has homes.
Correct. And then obviously the forfeiture of passports and then drug testing. Do you see it going any other way this afternoon?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, again, it's restricting his movement. It's prohibiting him from leaving the country. It's he can have that appeal bond revoked very quickly if he violates those conditions of bond. And so clearly the court's going to keep a thumb on him while he appeals his convictions.
Okay, because a lot of the talk today has been centered around the prosecution in this. More specifically, James Comey's daughter. Who has somehow magically made her way onto this prosecution up in New York.
She finds her way onto a lot of things.
Which seems odd to me. Why does this keep happening?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's supposed to be a lottery, right? Like it randomly assigned.
Yeah.
In New York's system, I believe it's a random assignment.
Yeah, that's odd. And I'm not sure how that keeps happening, but it certainly, causes reasonable-minded people like ourselves to question the integrity of the process, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of questionable things going on. Yeah. I mean, it just keeps popping up everywhere we go. And the next one is obviously the Idaho murders. That guy came into court about an hour ago right now. He has pled guilty to the murders of the 4 victims there.
Yeah, it's crazy to me because it's like, I haven't really followed the case, but I've followed cases before. What was the discovery process for his defense team that required this amount of time to realize he was fucked? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
It shouldn't have been much. I mean, under Brady v. Maryland, which is a United States Supreme Court case from the early 60s, the United States Supreme Court has said that basically the police and the prosecutors have to turn over everything they've got. And as a prosecutor, it's best practice to turn over everything as quickly as possible. There's not – in civil law, you kind of have these discovery games where it's hide the ball and you're fighting over the particularities of discovery and what gets revealed and what doesn't and on what timeline. From the prosecution standpoint, you just send it all instantly. So the defendant should have everything almost instantaneous upon their indictment or as soon as they get a counsel to enter their appearance on the defendant's behalf. So yeah, I mean, what did take this long? And I think it's really significant too. The victims, I mean, it seems to me that a lot of the victims' family members are speaking out against this plea deal and are not happy and dissatisfied. And most states, victims have rights. It's certainly true in the state of Missouri under Article 1, Section 32 of the Missouri Constitution. Victims have constitutional and statutory rights. And so it'll be interesting to see what the court does. The victims presumably would get a chance to speak at sentencing and speak out against what they would consider to be a lenient punishment and dissatisfaction with the process. So it's going to be interesting to hear from them.
Yeah, because the victims' families are split. Some of them want him to stay in prison for the next 65 years of his life because that's a living hell on its own. And then the other 2 were really advocating for the death penalty there. But once it's done and it's over. So there will be no death penalty. He will spend the rest of his life in jail. And there's nothing essentially that they can do at this point.
Yeah, it's weird to me that they continued to offer. I mean, after the court had spent so much time and money on this particular case, to offer a plea deal that late in the game, because usually a plea deal is like one of the major reasons to do it is to avoid the time and cost of this stuff, right? If we can get this guy to plead guilty, fine, we'll make a deal, and you can do life instead of death. But this late in the game, that seems really odd to me. that they would even accept a plea deal at this point.
It was a shock to everyone, and it just popped up out of nowhere.
Yeah, I saw it this morning on the news. I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
'Cause this has been going on for months.
It's going on for a long time, and he said, all right, I don't want to die, and I just want to get this over with. Because me personally, Andrew, I thought he was doing this out of fame. Very similar to the Luigi case, because how he was caught was on Reddit. So he started answering questions about the murders that he committed on Reddit, which ultimately led back to him and everything else. So I assumed that he would want to be famous and have this trial go on and everything else. Yeah. Two of the victims' families had said, I don't want to see the photos and all the other stuff in court, and I don't want to relive these memories anymore. And that's understandable as well. But I guess you have the right to do it. And he exercised his right and said, great, I'll take life in prison, and that's it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The prosecutor didn't have to offer a plea deal. You know what I mean? The prosecutor could have said, hey, you can open plea. You can just plead guilty and see what the judge is going to do, or you can take the deal. It's significant too, the way death penalty cases work. It's a bifurcated trial, and so the first trial is, did the defendant commit the offense beyond a reasonable doubt? And first degree murder, intentional killing of another, and then the second part of the trial is just as important in a death penalty case, and it's, should the ultimate punishment be imposed, and the jury has to weigh aggravating circumstances against mitigating circumstances. And in Missouri, at least, those aggravating circumstances are, again, defined in statute. And the mitigating circumstances it's kind of whatever the defense wants to put on. So, in other words, an aggravating circumstance is like, hey, you killed a police officer in the discharge of their official duties. That's death penalty eligible. Or the murder was exceedingly vile and wanton. So, like, you mutilated the body, or you've got a series of murders like we see here. The mitigating evidence is like, well, look, he had a bad childhood. He wasn't in the proper mental state. There's other things going on that caused this kind of criminogenic behavior. And that's the kind of evidence the defense would put on. And so, it is a tall order, admittedly, to convince 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt to impose the ultimate punishment and find that the aggravating circumstances outweigh the mitigating circumstances.
Yeah, and then, of course, there's the protracted state and federal appeals process, which usually costs somewhere between $1 million and $3 million, whereas life in prison for most people, especially guys in his 40s, is going to be something like somewhere between $350,000 and $1 million. Mm-hmm. So even at the high end of appeals, it's still kind of be less to just imprison him for the rest of his life. So maybe that's what the prosecutor was thinking. Yeah,
and most of this stuff, Andrew, as you know, during the appeals process for death row inmates drags out like 20 years anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. In Missouri, we if somebody has received the ultimate punishment and been sentenced to death, they get an independent review at the Missouri Supreme Court, and it's a proportionality review. So the 7 judges on the Missouri Supreme Court weigh whether or not the sentence is proportional to the crime committed. That's a special review that's not conducted in other criminal settings. And then, as you mentioned, you get a direct appeal, you get a motion for post-conviction relief, and then appeal from that. You get a state habeas proceedings, and then you get federal habeas proceedings that in Missouri, my office can't apply for a death warrant from the Missouri Supreme Court until we can demonstrate that the offender who's been sentenced to death has exhausted all of those appellate remedies. And so, yeah, it takes time. And look, at the end of the day, it's not up to the state. We're not driving that train. It's up to the judges who can take their time in considering these things. It's up to the defendant, the convicted offender, to file those proceedings to get that process moving. And so, it is very time consuming for sure.
Okay, and then I want to tie this together here for the next question, because Bob just told me that James Comey's daughter was also the lead prosecutor in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial as well. What are the chances of that up in New York? That's madness.
Look, man.
Just keeps getting put on the same sex trafficking cases?
Just a coincidence.
Okay, all right.
Well, I mean, like, that wouldn't be...
Maureen Comey is her name.
That wouldn't be altogether weird. Like, you would use a similar group of prosecutors for similar groups of cases, I would imagine, because they're experts in outlining that specific kind of case, right? Like, people that are prosecuting white-collar crime are probably not prosecuting brutal murders at the same time.
Is that typically true, Andrew?
Yeah, it's especially true at the federal level. They break down as specialists. Like, it really depends on the size of the office, which I think is also significant when we're talking about, which attorneys are assigned to which cases. Well, the New York office, I'm certain is huge. So the staffing numbers, so the odds of this particular attorney reappearing on these high profile cases is diminished by the high level of staffing. Again, the state of Missouri, we do criminal justice different. I mean, we have 114 counties plus the city of St. Louis that all independently elect a county prosecutor who prosecute at the trial court level. And some of those offices are part-time. Some of those offices have one attorney in them. There are some counties that struggle to find attorneys to staff those offices because they're in areas where there's just not a lot of attorneys that live there. I live in a county of 14,000 people. And so there are not a lot of attorneys that live here that want to be the county prosecutor.
Interesting. And since we are talking about Ghislaine Maxwell, me personally, on this show, I've said it's for almost a year, whatever the last time you were here, I was personally rooting for you to be the Attorney General of the United States of America under Donald Trump. Was there any conversations at all? Was there a short list on something like that? Did that ever come up as a possibility?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the support, man. And, it was great. I got to meet with the president and his transition team and meet with some of his staff and just think the world of them. They're doing a great job. Ultimately, I think the president has found a fantastic cabinet to lead the country. And it was a privilege to even be involved in some of those conversations, to be able to meet with them and talk to them about possibilities.
Oh, you did? So you were in those conversations?
Yeah, for sure. And
okay,
look,
great.
I mean, again, it was humbling to get to do that, and I don't know, where I rank ordered on the list, or if there was even a list, but definitely got to have some conversations, and again, it's cool to be able to experience that.
Well, you were number one in our hearts.
Yes, you were number one in our hearts. Okay,
that's what really matters. And here's why, by the way, you are, in my opinion, I think the data would reinforce this, the most effective attorney general in the country. The historical COVID-19 judgment against China.
Yep.
Right. Credit repair fraud and the tax assessment in Jackson County and St. Louis counties, respectively. Beating Planned Parenthood. Stopping Biden from paying off everybody's debts with our fucking tax dollars. The meat labeling stuff. I mean, it's hard to find and I keep track of this stuff. Newton up in Montana is really good too. But I keep track of this stuff, and not many people accomplish anything in that job, much less all of the shit that you've accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, I see your name in the press every day, and I look at what you're doing. It's shocking that you even have the time to do this, not only for your state, but for laws around the country, which is amazing. And that's why I personally wanted you in there.
Well, hey, man, I appreciate you guys. It means the world to me. And yeah, I mean, we've set the mark, right? I mean, we have led the nation in so many ways. That $24 billion judgment we obtained against the People's Republic of China for the wrongs they inflicted upon the rest of the world during COVID, the only state in the nation to achieve that kind of judgment, and it's 6 times larger than the closest judgment in the history of the state of Missouri. So we're breaking records, we're leading the way. It's the show me state, results matter. Proud of the work I get to do. Hey, I got to give credit where credit's due, man. I got a great team around me. And, the quarterback throws the passes, but ultimately you got to have an offensive line, you got to have receivers, you got to have a running back, you got to have an offensive coordinator, you got to have a coach, you got to have a defense. And so I've got a great team around me, and credit to the crew at the Missouri Attorney General's office for putting us in a position to deliver enormous wins. I like to tell people too, even if you don't live in Missouri and you're not a constituent, I can still represent you by fighting for the values that matter to you and me. And we like to think we're doing that every day.
Yeah, that's the job. I mean, so this latest ruling from the Supreme Court that kind of brought the district courts to heel, the two things that are still outstanding are class action suits, and the state attorneys general still have the right, as they always have, to launch what is effectively a class action on behalf of their state, right? It's a very important part of our federalist process to have the lower levels keeping the higher levels in check.
Yeah, for sure. And look, our balance of power between the states and the federal government, those relationships are codified in the United States Constitution, and they're designed to maximize liberty by constraining centralized authority. And so state attorneys general are the vanguard in the fight and pushing that envelope to ensure that the 10th Amendment still matters, that the rest of the Bill of Rights still matters, that we're a federal government of limited authority, limited power. And so I think that played out over the past 2 years in our fights against the Biden administration. where you saw these gross abuses of power. You had the Biden alphabet soup of administrative agencies who are unelected bureaucrats, unaccountable to we the people who the government's supposed to be serving, who are promulgating rules that have the force and effect of law, like the rule that schools had to adopt radical transgender bathroom policies or risk funding for free and reduced school lunch, like Biden's holding our kids at school, the most needy kids, hostage, or the Department of Energy telling you what appliances you can and can't use because they may or may not feel some radical left-wing wingnuts, vision for a Green New Deal failed policies, or the student loan bailout, which was, like you said, just a redistribution of taxpayer dollars to Ivy League, educated individuals who didn't pay off the debts that they rightfully incurred. And so fighting back with the lawsuits, we had more than 50-something lawsuits filed by the state of Missouri during that 2-year period, fighting back against the Biden administration. Scored some enormous wins. I got to go to the United States Supreme Court twice, representing the state of Missouri. And we notched some big wins that'll be landmark decisions going forward.
Yes, they will. Quick question on that. When you do that, is it Missouri taxpayer money that goes to funding that, or is that federal funding?
For funding the lawsuits?
Yes.
Yeah, it's all within the budget of my office. That budget is given to us in statute. It's an appropriations bill passed by the Missouri General Assembly. So I like to say we carry out the orders given to us by the General Assembly in statute and appropriations. And so they fund my office and allow me to do the great work we do on behalf of the people of the state of Missouri. And we've got great relationships in our General Assembly, which is really helpful.
That's great. So let's say you were AG of the United States, which was my dream, and it's fine. I want to ask you about the Epstein Files here. That's one of the top stories, and this will relate back to obviously what has happened today with Diddy and the same prosecution team and all that other stuff. What is stopping this? And if you were in there, how would you have handled this, I guess? Because to us, he died in, I believe, 2019, correct? Epstein?
Yeah, I think it was 19, yeah.
Yeah, allegedly.
Yeah.
And,
he definitely died. Well, that's true.
Yeah, exactly. But, this case has also been there since 2017. What is stopping any of this from going out to the public, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't know. And I think not knowing is the problem. I mean, nature abhors a vacuum, and that's certainly true in our news cycle and the information stream. And so just being articulate and putting down the marker of, hey, these are how many records we have to go through. This is how much staff we have processing. This is how much time we're spending on it. Here are the obstacles and barriers to us being able to release things. I certainly, want to respect the victims' rights and the victims' privacy. And so as there's the staff at DOJ and the FBI are navigating that, I think the General Bondi, pointed out early on that she had issued direct orders that staff were not carrying out, and that those staff needed to be censured and disciplined for failure to execute the orders of the chain of command. And what drives me crazy is you get this kind of DC swamp mentality where you've got these unelected bureaucrats who think they're smarter than everybody else and will be there longer than the principal, and that they get to do whatever they want. And that's not how this works. Under Article 2 of the United States Constitution, all authority is vested in a singular president of the United States of America, and he has a cabinet. And at the top of that cabinet for DOJ is the U.S. Attorney General. And when she issues an order, those folks at the lower level better snap to and get it done.
You know what's crazy to me? So it's Article 2, Section 3. The thing that's crazy to me is that these people will argue that they're trying to save democracy by literally undermining the purpose of the fucking vote.
Yes.
Like the Constitution said in Article 2, Section 3 says exactly what he just said. The executive, the singularly elected executive, has the right to do these certain things as outlined in the Constitution. And they're like, well, we have to stop him to save democracy. You have to stop democracy to save democracy. Yeah. What the fuck does that mean?
Yeah, I just don't get it.
Self-righteous jackasses.
Well, speaking of that, federal judge Randall D. Moss today ruled that President Trump exceeded his authority by blocking illegals in the U.S. from seeking asylum and is now ordering him to reopen the border to asylum seekers. Now, obviously, the Supreme Court ruling, Trump will just call this guy and tell him to go fuck himself, right?
One would think.
No, not one would think. It's not a class action suit, and he's not representing a fucking state. So he has no case here. Why are these guys still doing this after the Supreme? You see it every now and again, but I've never seen in this volume these federal district judges challenging the Supreme Court like this.
when they're usurping the judicial authority. They're usurping executive authority and abusing the limited role of the judiciary. Article 3 says that the federal judiciary adjudicates cases and controversies between parties. They don't make law. And there needs to be deference in making those determinations when they're conducting judicial review, deference to the executive and legislative branches. That's especially true when we're talking about things like immigration enforcement or national security or foreign relations, where the executive branch has plenary authority to deal with those things. And so when the judiciary is stepping in and interfering with the president's exercise of his constitutional authority, they're not playing some super constitutional umpire. They're actually violating the Constitution, violating their oath of office. I think they should be impeached. I think that Justice Roberts was wrong earlier this year when he said that, hey, look, we don't impeach judges because we disagree with them. Then what is the impeachment process? Why would we have it? It's a check and balance that the executive and legislative branches have against an overactive judiciary. And if we're not using it, it will grow stale. It will be impotent. It'll be useless. So I think it's absolutely appropriate. Look, the president of the United States takes the same oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. He has just as much authority as the Supreme Court does. And in fact, broader authority in these areas. And so that's why the judiciary is actually the entity that's creating the constitutional crisis.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Robert's categorization of all these actions as a mere political disagreement is completely false. They're outside of their judicial authority. That's aside from direct corruption, that is the only reason that you would impeach somebody. So what the fuck does impeachment exist for, if not for that?
I'm not sure.
I think if you impeach one of these guys, everybody else will shut the fuck up. Somebody's got to be made an example of, in my opinion.
Yeah, but who is it and when?
Well, that first dude is who I would go after.
Oseberg.
Oseberg, yeah.
Judge Oseberg.
Yeah, but he should be gone. There's no way that dude should be a judge.
Look, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, is that what it was? But that Alien Enemies Act, if you look at the plain text of that statute, it says that the president can deport individuals who are in this country if they represent a foreign invasion or, disjunctive or predatory incursion. Well, Tren de Aragua is a predatory incursion, and that's what the president labeled it as such. He was absolutely within his authority to deport those individuals instantly without any other process. Moreover, look at the riots, the anti-Trump, anti-ICE riots that were happening on the streets of Los Angeles, California, where people were claiming that they weren't in the United States of America, that this property properly belonged to Mexico, waving the flags of foreign nations, burning the American flag, attacking law enforcement officers, and destroying property. If that ain't a predatory incursion, I don't know what is. That is exactly why that statute was passed. And the other presidents have used it in the past. Funny how when Democrats use it, the Supreme Court rubber stamps it, but when President Trump wants to use it, all of a sudden it's the end of the earth.
Yeah, in the case of TDA, their host government, Venezuela, doesn't like them very much, but all the surrounding countries consider them a terrorist organization. All of them. It's not just, we didn't start that shit.
Yeah.
El Salvador labeled them a terrorist organization way before we got involved in any of this nonsense. I mean,
I don't get it. And then, Andrew, in your opinion, what is stopping Trump from invoking the Insurrection Act? Because at this point, this is kind of what this is.
Yeah, I mean, before you answer, right now in the BBB, there is something like $170 billion for immigration over the next 10 years or something like that. I think that's the number. Including.
Are we calling that the BBB, the Big Beautiful Bill?
Well, it was before it was Build Back Better. Now it's Big Beautiful Bill. That makes it okay, right?
I don't like it either.
Yeah, but omnibus bills are okay all of a sudden. But I understand that we need to deport a bunch of people that are not supposed to be here. But the government, the U.S. government, has this really nasty habit of creating permanent solutions to temporary problems. And if you think that the next Democratic administration is going to just fire all these immigration people, fire federal employees, never going to happen.
Nope.
And here's how we know that's the case. The largest expansion of the federal government history was under George W. Bush, and it was the Department of Homeland Security. Added about 160,000 new federal jobs. Under Biden, it went to 230,000, right?
It keeps growing and growing and growing.
He added an additional 70,000 people to that.
Yeah.
So it's not going to go down. You think what world are you living in that you think a liberal Democrat's going to come into office and reduce the size of government? Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah,
of course they're not going to do that.
It's not going to happen.
Let's go a little deeper into your example, because I think it's really, really important that people understand this. This was evidence that we uncovered in our case, Missouri v. Biden, to dismantle the vast censorship regime that the Biden administration, the deep state, have constructed to silence our voices on big tech social media platforms, took that all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And that Department of Homeland Security that was constituted under President George W. Bush, that was, look, in the wake of 9/11, everyone said, we need to be protected. We need this agency to protect us. But then as soon as a Democrat's in power, as soon as Biden's in power, he houses the nerve center of the vast censorship regime inside the Department of Homeland Security. The very agency that was supposed to be protecting us was weaponized to take our rights away from us and violate the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. I mean, that's scary stuff. It's Orwellian. And so you're absolutely right. In my estimation, it's a zero-sum game. More government, less liberty. More authoritarianism, less freedom. And that's why the structure of our system between the federal and state governments, that's why the structure of the separation of powers in the United States Constitution, that's why the enumeration of those rights that come from God, not man, and the realization that the Constitution is designed and intended to protect us from the government is so important.
Yeah, and this Insurrection Act was designed in the same way the Alien Enemies Act was, specifically for this purpose, to be able to, I guess, deploy the National Guard, right, in a federal capacity to deal with this problem so you don't have to create federal permanent billets for it. That's the whole purpose of the Insurrection Act. And we've never had a better or more just opportunity to invoke it than right now.
So why aren't we?
That is a good question, my friend.
Andrew, if you were in there, would you bring this to the table in front of the president and say, I think we should invoke this now because, Alligator Alcatraz is fun. It's a fun story, and psychologically it's great and everything else. But let's face it, there's 20 million illegal aliens in our country right now. That ain't going to do it. It's a fun story, and psychologically it'll probably stop people from coming in. But what's to stop President Trump from invoking the Insurrection Act?
I think you're right. And I think it's the duty and responsibility of the president's team to bring him every option available and get creative. Bring him creative legal solutions. When we filed the lawsuit against China, everyone said, how are you going to sue a foreign country? And then we won. And everyone's like, oh, well, that's great. How are you going to collect on the judgment? There's a process. It's in statute. We had options. We got creative. We pushed the envelope and we won. So it can happen. And it's up to his team to bring him those options. But look, I think you're absolutely right, especially look at the danger that's being posed by sleeper cells of Iranians or Hezbollah, other individuals who have now, their antipathy towards America is peaked. I think that creates a real threat to the safety and security of the American people. If we don't have borders, we don't have a country. And that's why the founding fathers gave broad plenary authority to the executive to respond to these types of national emergencies when you're dealing with national security, when you're dealing with foreign relations.
And then next up here, it's just the hits keep coming here. So Paramount just settled its lawsuit against Donald Trump, specifically 60 Minutes. Now, I predicted this, a couple weeks ago here. I told you the exact numbers in which this was going to happen. However, one thing did not happen here, according to this settlement. They will not be making a public apology on air. However, they are going to give more money, and it is going to the presidential library there. And part of this settlement as well, they're going to pay Trump's legal fees, costs, and all that money. And they're going to release the written transcripts of future 60 Minutes interviews with presidential candidates.
That's really funny. So Trump has the ability to do one of the funniest things ever right now, which is take the money they give him for the presidential library and make a monument to fake news. That's exactly, there should be an entire wing of his presidential library with all the very fine people, Russia, all that shit. I'm not kidding.
I love it.
Build a permanent monument to how full of shit those people are so nobody ever forgets.
Yeah, because you're one of those people, man. I read so much negative slander about you in the media. It's insane. Out of all the AGs, state AGs in America, you're the one that they target every single day. Do you Google search or have the alerts pop up in your email about all the shit that's being talked against you in the media?
Oh man, I don't. I should, because I wear it as a badge of honor. If you're irritating the right people, you're doing the right things. And I think the American public have just lost all faith and confidence in legacy media sources. I think that's why shows like this are so important. People are tired of tuning on the TV, tuning into the TV and seeing that fake news where they're clearly doing editorialization, editing an interview in such a way to change fundamentally an answer that was provided, and we feel like we're being sold a bill of goods, and it's a form of censorship. It's corporate censorship. We see that happening on big tech social media platforms with the algorithms that these Silicon Valley titans have a monopoly over. That I think is an unprecedented consolidation of power. So we've got to stay vigilant on that too. But yeah, I mean, it's scary stuff, and I think people are sick of it. I don't pay attention, but I do wear it as a badge of honor, and certainly I have folks that regularly I get texts that like every time the St. Louis Post-Dispatch writes a negative piece on me, they text me and say, hey, we like you even more now. So again, it can be a good thing.
Well, if you don't mind, can I read the greatest hits here, because it's so wild that like. Usually when you have a name or a story or whatever, it's just related to one article, and there's 20 different articles about the same subject. With you, it is wildly different across the map. So I'm just going to read off the last 2 weeks, if you don't mind. Missouri AG Bailey launches investigation into Grain Belt Express power line project. That's the first one there. Next up is Columbia's DEI initiatives under investigation by Missouri Attorney General. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the first two are true?
Absolutely.
Okay, next up, Missouri AG sues Jackson County over gun ordinance.
Also true. I'll own that one.
Okay. Attorney General Bailey takes a major role in representing the St. Louis Police Department.
Yeah, that's true. We just got new legislation that makes the St. Louis Police Department state employees, and so they're the newest clients of my law firm.
Oh,
okay.
Good for them.
Yeah, exactly. Next up, Attorney General Andrew Bailey demands records from Missouri abortion nonprofit.
Yep.
That one's true too. Okay. All right.
Yeah, that one's true too.
U.S. Supreme Court affirms Missouri's right to protect children from gender mutilation. True?
Yeah, also true. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, these are wild across the board here.
It's a spectrum. It's a broad spectrum of issues we've tackled for sure.
It is, but like, how do you have this much time? I'll keep going. Missouri AG says Jackson County firearms. That one's the same one. And Missouri AG presses Google to investigate content practices related to firearms. So what is that one?
Yeah, look, our friends in the 2A community are regularly censored, deplatformed, de-emphasized, shut down by corporate censors in Silicon Valley. This is kind of what I was talking about. And Google is one of the largest big tech social media platforms, and we need to understand how that algorithm works to ensure that consumers in the state of Missouri and across the country are protected. At the end of the day, we have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. We have a First Amendment right to talk about it. And if the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is being abused by these big tech social media oligarchs, that is a antitrust problem, but it's also a consumer protection problem. And the state attorneys general are vested with being consumer watchdogs and protecting consumers of their state. We've also, one of the things that you haven't read yet, but I think is really significant, we're the first state in the nation to promulgate a consumer protection rule that requires big tech social media platforms, the biggest four, to allow for algorithmic choice. In other words, when you log on to the platform, they have to give the third-party vendors the opportunity to advertise and consumers to select from content moderators that will curate feeds that are more to their liking. So instead of having this consolidation of power and authority and a monopoly over the algorithms, let the consumers choose. And I think that's going to be better for consumers. I think it's better for big tech. It opens up the marketplace and creates more competition. I mean, the whole idea here is that big tech wants you on their screens. Well, you're more likely to spend time on their screens if you're getting a feed that's curated by an entity you trust, respect, and like.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
because I just heard, by the way, that Meta is making a play for TikTok. Have you heard that?
Somebody's going to buy it. Yeah. Some company that's rooted in the U.S. is going to have to buy it. It'll be somebody. I don't know who it's going to be yet, but one of the other problems that these social media companies are going to have to deal with at some point is that it's becoming more and more verifiable that the bulk of their users are not real people. There are think I said this before, the organization I work with think it's somewhere between like 60 and 70% of certain types of traffic that are completely fraudulent. And a publicly traded company like Alphabet, publicly traded company like Meta, and now Twitter, who's private, are going to have to account for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders. And if you're telling them numbers that aren't real, or if you're telling advertisers numbers that aren't real, that is fraud. And that they're going to have to deal with this at some point. They're pretending it doesn't exist right now, but I'm telling you that it does, and we can verify it. And some of this information is going to be coming out over the next couple of months, and it's going to be very bad for these companies that don't get out ahead of it.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Andrew, is on our social media platforms, we'll see numbers diminish very, very quickly. And it appears as if some of these platforms are trying to get ahead of it by deleting some of these bots.
Yeah.
But Elon Musk himself is, because he posted it, is just said, dude, it's like whack-a-mole. We can't stop all these people here.
That's not true.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's true or not.
He's either ignorant or lying about that, because we can identify him.
Okay.
Like, for example, we're doing a story on fake news tomorrow about 270,000 posts made over a 2-day period from Iranian bot farms to try to nudge people in the right direction with regard to Iran striking or Israel striking Iran.
Really?
270,000 individual posts.
Okay.
Right? Over the course of 2 days. I mean, it's incredible. It's like a huge bulk. And this is what the internet is right now. If you're in political spheres and in social spheres. So if you're talking about politics, there are foreign adversaries, primarily Russia, China, and Iran, but Iran's kind of a cutout of China. Those three, specifically North Korea to a smaller degree, who's another cutout of China, who are sending out thousands and thousands of individuals who each control hundreds of screens at a time. And they have AI programs where they can type some inflammatory this or that on either side. They don't care about the politics. They care about the chaos. And it alters them a little bit and posts them all within a couple of minutes of each other. And it makes the person posting the dumb inflammatory shit think, oh yeah, people agree with me. So I'm going to keep saying this, like Candace Owens, for example. And two, it makes people that are observing think, oh, maybe I'm wrong about this, because it's bandwagon fallacy.
Yeah.
So many people believe this. Is this really a thing? And it lends credence to it. It's happening all over the place. Every single time there's any kind of political issue or social issue, right? The transgenderism thing that happened, that started back in around 2012 is when it started to pick up. It was a direct result of this social media manipulation, right?
Interesting.
And so many other things. And we're going to show it. We're going to do some specials on this show we're going to break down individual posts that were very influential from influencers on the right and the left, and show exactly how they were manipulated, who was doing it, and how it happened, and all that stuff. And it's going to once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. I'm telling you.
And has that come across your desk, Andrew?
You know, certainly we're aware of it. The challenge from a government perspective is the opposite, which is the censorship, right? The remedy for disfavored speech is more speech, not government censorship. And so shine the light of truth on it. I think that's the best medicine for that kind of that harm. But yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think we have to acknowledge that big tech social media platforms wield enormous and unprecedented influence over public opinion and over public perception. And let's go back to the censorship piece. I mean, take the censorship that was going on under King George that resulted in the First Amendment. When King George shut down a printing press in the colonies, the world knew he had done it, and he was really stifling one medium of communication, the written word. And yet, when Joe Biden's censorship regime from DHS was demanding that tweets and posts be pulled from big tech in 2020 and beyond, you know, it was a much more dynamic and nefarious form of censorship. You could be deplatformed, de-emphasized, and you may not know that it happened, and certainly your audience may not know that it happened. And they have a right to hear from you as well. The First Amendment extends not only to speakers but to listeners. And the medium of communication is more dynamic. It's visual imagery. It's the written word. It's the spoken word. And so it's dangerous, and it's scary that this consolidation of power in Silicon Valley wields that much influence. And I think they owe, like you said, a fiduciary responsibility to identify when the voices are being amplified and it's not organic, it's not authentic.
Yeah. Speaking of censorship, excuse me.
Yeah, clear your throat.
You've experienced a little bit of yourself recently. There was this event called GunCon, which I've never personally heard of before.
No, I have never been invited.
But it was held at this establishment called Twist Drill in Cleveland, and our good friend Attorney General Andrew Bailey was supposed to be a guest speaker there, ironically to speak about censorship, if I'm not mistaken. And
That's right.
Michael Fleming, I assume, he's the owner of the building.
Okay.
I'm told the proprietors said that he can't come speak there.
And now, why is that, Andrew? Why weren't you allowed to speak there?
I'm too conservative for GunCon, I guess. What happened was,
Wow, that's a big distinction there.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
you should get some merch made that says that for your next campaign.
I'd replace that printer in the background with a plaque of that because that's
right.
amazing.
That's right. No, but in Missouri, we led the way fighting against the gender mutilation of children, and we had a whistleblower in St. Louis from one of these clinics that came out and swore out an affidavit saying parents were being coerced, not consenting to these dangerous procedures, the administration of powerful chemicals that forever alter these kids' bodies. The parents were being lied to. The clinics weren't tracking any negative health outcomes, and they weren't offering mental health treatments on the front end. So instead of treating what was perceived to be a mental health problem, gender dysphoria, with traditional psychology or psychiatry, they were racing towards the administration of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, for which there are 0 FDA approvals to treat gender dysphoria, or referring kids that are under 17 years of age for dangerous and irreversible surgeries. Missouri shined a light of truth on that and shut the clinics down. I was very aggressive in going after these people, using every tool in my arsenal to fight back, to protect kids. I want Missouri to be the safest state in the nation for children. And the left despises me for that. Ultimately, our General Assembly passed a bill to outlaw it. The ACLU sued. My office defended that bill in court, and we were the first and only state to date in the nation to successfully defend that kind of measure at the trial court level. Weeks ago, the United States Supreme Court handed down a decision that now puts us in a better legal footing and found that there was a rational basis for states to protect kids, and it's not sex-based discrimination to say you shouldn't be giving kids these powerful drugs when there's no science to back it up. So a big win there. But the owner of the venue hated my position on these issues and told GunCon they weren't allowed to have me speak, or that they would hold GunCon liable for breach of contract. So it looks like a bait and switch to me. Like, you've got to know when you rent your venue to GunCon that there's going to be conservatives showing up, right?
Yeah.
Myself and other people were banned from the premises and canceled and censored from GunCon, for me at least, because of my outspoken criticism against gender mutilation of children.
There's going to be, like, 20 or 30 years from now, there's going to be a lot of stuff we look back on and think, what the fuck?
Yeah. What were we thinking?
Like, how did that ever happen? I don't know that that's true of other generations. Like, when I look back on the 50s, I'm like, yeah, the stuff that the FDA told us about food and medicine was clearly fucked up. And there was clearly a monetary gain happening. That's the reason they did it. That's fucked up, right? But to convince people to mutilate their children is not something that's, aside from circumcision, which is just mutilation, by the way. There's no functional purpose for that shit.
I wish I still had that skin back.
I've got a couple in my house, actually.
Okay, great. I'll reattach it.
Yeah, we can get it sewn back on. But
Great.
Anytime the previous generations before ours, the boomers and greatest, I don't look back on those and be like, and see some kind of moral issue like this. Like, I can't fucking believe these guys. What were you thinking?
It's interesting you say that, because I actually asked my mom about this. And, different generation and everything else. And I said, we do a daily show. We're going through all these things that to us seem wild and crazy and out of control. And she's like, you've got to remember, every decade went through this. She goes, go back to the 60s. Blacks couldn't vote. That act didn't pass until 1964.
Well, that's not true.
We couldn't do anything.
Yeah, they voted.
They didn't have rights. The Civil Acts right didn't pass until 1964.
Yeah, there was some challenge. So the 13th and 14th Amendments obviously cleared that stuff up.
15th.
And then our 15th Amendment, just like slavery on to voting rights. But Jim Crow persisted for a long time. So we created these weird things like a literacy test or a poll tax. Just anything that black people couldn't do, we were like, oh, well, that's a requirement now, right?
Sure.
Which is, by the way, what the Chevron decision overturned. That has to be a law. You can't just fucking say shit like that. It has to be either a concept, whatever. But yeah.
But even going further with her, she said the next one up was Vietnam. Everybody knew that was a war we shouldn't have been in. They were putting it on the news every day and everything else, and people were sick of it. And then I said, all right, well, let's relate this to this generation. And her response was, because news is a 24-hour cycle and there's so much social media in your face every single day, there's something more and more to get enraged about. Whereas, let's take if Vietnam was going on in the days of Twitter and Facebook and everything today, and all this shit was happening in front of your faces, it would be just as violent, just as everything else across the board. They just didn't have the opportunity to see it in front of their face every single second of the day in the way that we see it.
Yeah, but
the other problem we're facing is what you said in 2013 with transgender. You have fake bots and everyone else who's amplifying a very, very minority group in the United States of America and exploding it into this thing that we're all supposed to accept. And that's a part of the other issue that those previous generations simply didn't have to deal with.
Yeah. Usually it was the newer generation overcoming the moral shortcomings of the previous one, right? That's not new. That's always been the case in human history for the most part. What's new about this generation is that they injected all of these evil things. Like the new generation decided to do all this evil shit, and the older generation didn't stop them for some reason. I don't know why, right? Usually there's a battle between these groups. But yeah, it's and I don't think there's ever going to be a period in American history that we look back on with more shame than this period right now, because slavery existed worldwide. As a matter of fact, the Barbary slave trade lasted way longer than ours did. And the UK ended it in the 1830s. White people ended slavery, by the way. I've got a sticker right there that says so.
I'm gonna stick it.
Not that that's important, but the Barbary slave trade continued, and human slavery exists today in China more than anywhere else, right? They got 1 million slaves right now.
But let's just say you were able to get footage of that. Greta Thunberg would be there in 10 seconds on a wooden boat.
No, she wouldn't.
And then it would be all over social media.
Greta Thunberg only cares when white people do something wrong.
Oh, you're right.
So,
but any other form of slavery, they would have been there. This would have been a huge social media campaign and everything else.
So I don't consider slavery an American national shame. I consider it like Cro-Magnon human beings being stupid, right? And I think that carried over to some degree. But the new generation doing something that's evil, I think this is the first time in a meaningful way we've seen it envelop a big part of our social sphere. I don't know. I mean, it's all Marxism. It's just Marxism is how it happened, but it's fucking nuts.
But Andrew, to your point, and going against big tech and everything else, big tech is jamming this in your face every single second of the day. It is almost, as a parent, I've got 3 kids, it is almost unavoidable to keep your kids off an iPad for certain elements, especially in school. Because now it's pretty much a requirement. You know, once you get to middle school and later on in elementary school, you're going to hear things. They're going to tell each other things. Some of the jokes that I've heard, driving my kids home back from sports and their friends in the back seat of the car, I'm like, shit, you know about that? In my mind, obviously, I don't say that to them. And I certainly don't let them watch this show. Never have. Hopefully never will. They're going to find it on their own. But I think that plays a major role in it. And what you're doing with big tech and trying to keep them responsible right now, I think is a major part of what's going to help this next generation get through this. Because if they don't, then yeah, it's going to be real versus fake. AI is getting better and better every single day. We're going to be fooled by, different videos, speeches, pictures more and more, and I'm certainly one of them. Like, I'm guilty of it. In the last 3 weeks on this show, I think I've been fooled by 7 posts that I tried to verify that weren't real. So what are you guys going to do to prevent this, and is there any rules in place? Because right now, this big, beautiful bill, from what I've read, is going to leave restrictions off AI for 10 years, and that's not great either.
Yeah, it's not. A few observations here. Let's go back to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And that was the statute that was passed by Congress to protect the internet, to protect the social media platforms. It allowed the rapid growth, exponential growth of social media platforms. And it was designed to shield them from civil liability from things that third parties were posting. And so it operates as a shield and says they're not liable as publishers, but it also operates as a sword and says that they are allowed to moderate content. But it doesn't say that they have to be the only ones moderating content. And so, again, I think that the nature of the way in which humans are communicating with each other today is different than when we were kids. It is hard to go tell somebody that they're no good, so-and-so to their face because they might punch it, right? But if you're on a keystrokes on a keyboard on your phone or on a computer, it's easy to be a tough guy and have these kind of outrageous, outlandish opinions. And so I think that changes the nature of the conversation. I think you're right, though. You have this kind of like dogpile effect where you've got bots and others that pile onto an idea for or against something. They create an inauthentic experience for the user. And I think that's why our algorithmic choice rule is so important. We have Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, but it can run in parallel and be synthesized with state enforcement of antitrust law or state enforcement of consumer protection law. And ensuring that consumers have access to third-party vendors to moderate their content is a win for everybody and ultimately breaks up that monopolistic control that big tech has over the algorithms.
Yeah, decentralization is almost always the solution for institutional power gone awry. And, it doesn't help that we're in like year, I guess, 60 something of the news being completely full of shit. This is an ABC tweet from today.
Okay.
Ready? The leader of an MS-13 clique in the suburbs of New York City faces sentencing Wednesday in federal racketeering case involving 8 murders, including the 2016 killings of 2 high school girls that focused on the nation's attention on the violent gang.
A clique?
An MS-13 clique? What
Yeah.
the fuck does that mean? Is that like Maryland Father?
We can't say
Are you
gang
kidding me?
anymore? No,
Oh
we
my
can't say gang
God,
anymore?
man.
Is that what we...
It's a terrorist organization. MS-13 is a terrorist organization. Hard stop.
Yeah.
But that's how it is, right? It's there's very little news anymore. It's mostly editorializing. And the problem, like I appreciate some of the things that Elon did with Twitter back in the day. However, this whole "we are the news now" thing, it's like, yeah, you are, just like the old news, because you're being influenced whether you know it or not. Like this shit has got to stop. And to Andrew's point, sunlight's the best disinfectant, and good ideas are the solution for bad ideas. Good and more ideas. You don't the idea that government is somehow going to step in and fix anything ever is fucking stupid. When does that ever happen?
It's been a while. It's been a while, but at least Andrew's fighting the good fight here.
Yeah. Well, he's like his version of the government stepping in and doing something is him stopping the government from doing things.
Right.
Well, let's look at the net choice decision that the United States Supreme Court handed down last summer, where they struck down laws in Texas and Florida that required the big tech social media platforms to alter their own internal algorithms and content moderation in certain ways. And the Supreme Court said, look, the big tech social media platforms, the way they moderate contents and feeds is actually speech that is protected. So those state statutes violated the right to free speech. And so rather than regulating the moderation and the algorithms themselves, moderate the marketplace or regulate the marketplace and let the market forces provide the consumers with the best kind of content moderation or feed, curated feeds.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. Whether or not they'll actually do it, we'll see. But another thing I wanted to commend you on was one of these stories I brought up about Columbia's DEI initiatives that were under investigation by you. Look, the Harvards, the Columbias, all these guys in the Ivy League have been under scrutiny now for a long time. It was just announced a couple hours ago that Penn will actually strip Leah Thomas of all of those medals as a transgender swimmer who beat everybody else, and they will be eligible for funding again. I think if you guys, the Trump administration did that, but same with what you're doing with Columbia. If you guys don't step up, this funding will continue, and that will change children's mind. Back to your points of how do we create a better society. So at least there is people out there like you fighting the good fights, and it's got to continue here because these are things that are common sense. And as, in my opinion, and as we're watching these unfold, most of them are caving to these demands once they're pressed on the issue, and they're going to lose funding. Is there any other universities that you're looking at or any other programs that you're looking at going after in the future?
Yeah, certainly. We've been adamant about that. We've gone after corporations, Starbucks being one of them, IBM being the other, where you've got on Starbucks webpage, they brag about the racial equity index and meeting certain hiring quotas, but that's illegal. It's always making employment decisions based on the color of someone's skin has always been illegal. It is certainly illegal here in Missouri under the Missouri Human Rights Act. Most recently, when we talk about Columbia, what we're talking about is the city of Columbia, Missouri, where the University of Missouri is. But the city of Columbia just recently recommitted itself to a DEI program that they instituted as part of their strategic plan in 2021, where they say things like, hey, we're going to start viewing our programs, our funding through a racial equity lens and promoting racial equity. Well, what do those terms mean? And they need to answer questions about that, because either they're vapid platitudes and these people are morons, or they're discriminatory. And if they are discriminatory, they're violating the law and we're going to hold them accountable.
Yeah, I mean, because as the rest of this continues to unfold here, the next one I'm looking at, me personally, is some of these protests in regards to Palestine and Israel on college campuses. Now, let's say this happened at University of Missouri. How would that shake out for some of these protesters out there?
Look, everyone has a right to free speech and has a right to voice their political opinions. But what you don't have a right to do is block thoroughfares, attack police officers, and destroy property. And that's what we saw playing out in some of these anti-Israel protests across the country. And it's despicable. Shame on those people. In Missouri, it's a criminal offense to block a thoroughfare, to block a roadway that's publicly accessible. I have a right to go to and from my job to make money to be able to feed my family. And how dare these idiots interfere with the exercise of my right? And so, it's important to respect the First Amendment and have a place for free, fair, and open debate while not crossing that line to criminal behavior.
Yeah, the First Amendment doesn't protect against false imprisonment, which is, depending on the state you're in or if it's a federal jurisdiction, impeding somebody's movements and holding them in place can certainly be qualified as false imprisonment, right?
Yeah.
And if you try to move them from one place to another, it could also be attempted kidnapping, right? Like if you wanted to get out that door and I stopped you, that's false imprisonment. If I grab you and move you to a different part of the room or to a different room, that's kidnapping. That's the limit, right? It's that low. So what these people are doing by fucking pinning people into classrooms sometimes, like what happened with Riley Gaines.
Yep.
A couple, I think was that last year? Maybe last year or 2 years ago. Shit like that, that's a fucking felony, right? That is false imprisonment. And the fact that it hasn't been prosecuted as such is crazy to me.
Yeah, and for you, Andrew, I know Ron DeSantis, Governor Ron DeSantis down in Florida went on the news and said, hey, you have the right to drive through these people if they're impeding your car. Do you have the same law in your state currently?
Yeah, look, Missourians have a full and complete castle doctrine right to defend themselves, especially if they feel like they're, reasonable apprehension of immediate, imminent danger. And so in Missouri, it's really unique. Like, we're afforded this great opportunity because it's not an affirmative defense where you, as a defendant that were charged, you'd have to put on evidence. It's a special negative defense. So let's say somebody breaks into my house and I shoot them and the prosecutor charges me with a homicide. I go to court and I merely inject the issue of self-defense. Well, now the state bears the burden of proof of proving it wasn't self-defense, and they bear that burden beyond a reasonable doubt. How do you prove a negative beyond a reasonable doubt? That gets really challenging. The same is true on open streets. It's not confined to the house. I call it the castle doctrine because that's what it most closely resembles. But you don't have to be in your castle to defend yourself. You have a statutory and a God-given right to defend yourself in the state of Missouri anytime you're concerned about serious physical injury, imminent apprehension of imminent threat, and certainly that I think that's a powerful tool.
Yes.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it much in his state. Have you?
No, not a lot in Missouri, no. And it's, look, it is probably a function of those things existing. I mean, look, consequences matter in life, no matter what they are. Even the guardrails that we build for ourselves in our own lives, the consequences might be I don't get the pay that I want, or I don't get the job that I want, or I don't get the girl that I want. Where there's consequences all over the place. And every time we, as a society, try to reverse engineer consequences out of the way, we fuck ourselves up, right? So I don't care if you're 18 years old and an idealist. You still have to play by these rules we've agreed upon. And the most important one is that we respect each other and don't interfere with each other's right to live. That's it, right? If you can do that, you can do any of the other stuff you want.
You guys remember Mark McCloskey in St. Louis? He and his wife,
Patty,
there was a BLM protest in 2020. and they lived in the city of St. Louis, and this BLM protest entered this gated neighborhood, was tearing property, was trespassing, was making verbal threats, and Mark McCloskey got an AR-15 and stood on his lawn and stood there, and he didn't point the weapon at anybody. He wasn't angry or threatening. He was just demonstrating his willingness to defend himself, and a Soros-backed prosecutor charged him with a criminal offense. Proud to say I helped draft the pardon document to get him clemency from our governor so that he was not held to account for something that wasn't a criminal offense to begin with.
Was that you?
Yeah, man.
I didn't know that was you.
Pardon document because I felt so strongly about that. This guy's exercising his Second Amendment right. Again, those rights come from God, not man.
Yeah.
The Constitution exists to protect us from the government. And how dare that Soros-backed prosecutor turn a blind eye to the BLM protesters who were trespassing and destroying property and go after someone for exercising their God-given right.
Yeah, that same law exists here in Texas. Like if you go, somebody's causing a problem in your neighborhood, you're absolutely within your rights to brandish on your property.
Okay.
Now, you can't point the weapon at them. You can't fire it. Firing warning shots is against the law in every state, by the way. Don't do that stupid shit. If you're gonna if you got to shoot to kill. That's the rule. But yeah, it's a law here in Texas too. If somebody's running amok in my neighborhood and I want to fucking kid up and stand on my lawn with my fucking AR strapped with a suppressor on it, that is my right to do. Right.
Interesting. What about the wife who was kind of holding the martini glass and the little derringer like this?
I think that
was she cool or not? Like I just asking for the future, just in case my wife pulls hers out of her purse.
Yeah. It was a little less imposing than the AR-15, but I think you got the job done.
I don't know. Never go against a white suburban martini mom, dude. That's the real danger in America.
Was it a Walther PPK? I'm trying to remember what the firearm was.
I thought it looked like a little Derringer, a little, something you keep in your boot purse, but like, it's an old school weapon, but I loved it, and you could tell she hadn't used it in a while. Probably wasn't loaded, but
yeah, that looks like a Walther to me.
Okay, yeah, but that was fun. Look, I know you're an extremely busy man. We appreciate the time today. Obviously, now's the point in the show where we get to the Drinkin' Bro of the Week, which is someone who has inspired you or helped you become the person you are today. Who would you like to give the Drinkin' Bro of the Week to?
Oh, man. That is a good question. I would say I had a commander when I was in the Army that was a great mentor. His name is Andy Pfluger. He was a captain. I was a first lieutenant. I was an executive officer. He was the company commander. And just a great influence on me. Great all-around human being, American hero.
Okay. Cheers. And for us, by the way, we're a good luck charm. We really believe in you and love what you're doing out there. Do you know that everybody who's been on this show is a member of Trump's cabinet right now? And almost every single person that has been on this show has either moved to Senate or Congress or governor. So I think this Biden, I would have already gone to the bullpen, okay? I'm just saying. I'm throwing that out there. We appreciate you being here. Where can everybody follow you on social media and check out all you're doing?
Yeah, check us out on X. You can go to our spot where you can sign up to receive email notifications from our office. Again, I like to tell people, even if you don't live in Missouri, even if you're not a constituent, I can still represent you in fighting for our shared values. Encourage people to check out ago.mo.gov.
Awesome, man. We love you, and you've got a standing invite anytime you want to come on. For real, you're one of the best there is out there, and we need more men like you.
Hey, thanks, guys. Really appreciate y'all. Good friends. Look forward to talking again soon. Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July. And since it is 4th of July, go to omahasteaks.com/drinkinbros. 50% off everything site-wide and an extra $45 off for our listeners.
Yeah.
For Anthony
Hollaway.
If
you're out there and you're British, just remember we can fucking kick your ass anytime we want.
We can, yeah.
Don't even think about it.
We can, yeah. Don't think about invading us again,
just
all right? Don't. Just don't. Yeah. As Kamala says, don't. Was that what she said?
No, I think it was Joe.
Oh, was it Joe? How'd that work out for him?
It did not. Yeah.
It didn't work out for the British either.
Yeah.
Appreciate you tuning in. For D'Anthony Hollaway, I'm Ross Patterson. This is the Drinkin' Bros podcast. Good night, everyone.